And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, General Paul Nakasone. General Nakasone is the U.S. Army Commander of the United States CyberCommand and Director at the National Security Agency. General Nakasone has held command and staff positions across all levels of the Army, with assignments in the United States, the Republic of Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He has also served on 2 occasions as the staff officer on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A graduate of the U.S. Army War College, the Command and General Staff College, and Defense Intelligence College, General Nakasone has also received numerous awards and decorations, including the Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, and a Bronze Star. General Nakasone, welcome to Vanderbilt.
Chancellor, thank you so much. Might I just add, it is great to be in Nashville. Thank you so much, Chancellor, for that warm welcome. And thank you to everyone at Vanderbilt for what I think will be a very, very productive next couple days to have a discussion about the emerging trends, the emerging threats, how we're looking at modern conflict of the future. So as we start today, I thought it might be good just to baseline and tell you a little bit about myself, because I think that informs some of my thinking, obviously the experiences that I've had, what we've tried to do in terms of our activities at the National Security Agency, U.S. CyberCommand, but also my thoughts about the near, mid, and long-term opportunities and challenges our nation faces. So as the Chancellor mentioned, I'm an Army officer with 35 years of experience. I came into the Army in a much different time during the Reagan administration. We were in the midst, or I guess at that time, we didn't realize it, but at the end of the Cold War. As we looked at what we faced at the time, it clearly was one central adversary, and that was the Soviet Union. Over a course of assignments, I found myself at the Pentagon on the 11th of September, 2001. A fairly significant day, obviously, for all of us in our nation and the world. But from that time, like many of the officers of my generation, and many of the officers I serve with today, for the next 2 decades, we found ourselves in a series of deployments and activities and a focused nature with regards to counterterrorism and violent extremist organizations. But for myself, I would tell you that there was an opportunity in 2007 when I arrived at the National Security Agency to take over a unit that was focused on support to military operations. My first time at Fort Meade, I was amazed at the technology. I was amazed at the tradecraft. But I will tell you the fundamental thing that amazed me was the talent. Because after everything that is done at the National Security Agency and even U.S. CyberCommand, the key piece that sets us apart is our talent. In 2009, I had the opportunity, working for then Director General Keith Alexander, to work amongst a team of 4 individuals to put together what then was an idea that became U.S. CyberCommand. What do we base that idea off of? Well, first of all, we base that idea off of our experiences in 2008 with regards to Operation Buckshot Yankee. And for those of you that don't recall Operation Buckshot Yankee, it was an adversary's penetration of our classified networks in the United States. But here's the other thing that we based U.S. CyberCommand off of. That was our experiences, many of us who had deployed in and out of Afghanistan for a period of time, regarding what the National Security Agency could do in terms of bringing outcomes to the nation. We had seen the power of the cryptologic system, and as we thought about how U.S. CyberCommand needed to form, grow, and be able to be relevant in a very changing world, we knew that part of that had to be based upon, and a large part of it with an association and partnership with the National Security Agency. So I am, as the commander of U.S. CyberCommand and the director of the National Security Agency, headquartered at Fort Meade, Maryland. Now, the great news about Fort Meade, Maryland is you are 26.2 miles, that's 1 marathon away from the Pentagon. Now, the challenging news about being at Fort Meade, Maryland is you're 26.2 miles away from the Pentagon. Today marks my 4th year in the job. I just realized that yesterday as we were flying into Nashville. Time flies. But what I would tell you over the past 4 years is my experience in terms of what I'm seeing in this ever-changing domain really is wrapped up in 3 different ideas. First of all, is this idea of how much the strategic landscape has changed in terms of where we're operating. Go and look no further than the actors that we are focused on today. Even 2 years ago, none of us would think at the National Security Agency and U.S. CyberCommand that ransomware was anything but a law enforcement activity. Secondly, is I would offer that in the past 4 years, the nation's understanding of cybersecurity has grown significantly, and look no further than Colonial Pipeline in the spring of 2021. This brought to our idea, the idea that I have often said that cybersecurity is national security. And the third piece I would tell you in the past 4 years is just the growing relevance, capability, and outputs of what the National Security Agency has been able to do, both in terms of its foreign intelligence mission, delivering the insights and the indications and warning that are so critical to our nation, but also, as you will hear shortly, the cybersecurity efforts of what our agency has been able to do. Not even in existence 4 years ago, what we've been able to do over the past 2 years with regards to our insights to what is happening in this domain, bringing the outcomes of what our nation needs, and being able to work with a series of partners to develop a much secure ecosystem. But it's not just the National Security Agency. I would tell you also U.S. CyberCommand. As I look at the command today, 4 years into it, I see a command with much greater capabilities, a command that has been able to utilize its capacity, authorities, and outcomes in a series of different very significant events for our nation, whether or not it's been election security, whether or not it's been actions against Iranian extremists, or whether or not it's been the recent ransomware activities. This is a command that has come into its own. So as was mentioned, I'm in a fairly unique position. I am both the commander of a combatant command, and I'm the director of the largest element of the U.S. intelligence community. Why is that important? Because I would tell you it's important because I think this is our nation's advantage. Being able to move with speed in a domain that requires it, being able to be agile to threats that require it, and being able to do it with a unity of effort that our agency and command can do today. Let's talk a little bit about the command and the agency just to baseline everyone in terms of what we do. So if you take a look at U.S. CyberCommand, in our parlance, we think we are a startup. 12 years old as of next month. We have 1,000 folks in our headquarters, and we have about 20,000 amongst our commands. We do 3 things for the nation. First of all, we defend our DoD networks. Our DoD networks, our weapon systems, and our data. You'd say, well, how big of an issue is that? Well, we have about 15,000 classified and unclassified networks that come together to make the DoD information network. We have about 4.5 million endpoints on this network. We have about 3.5 million users, and we have about 600,000 mobile subscribers. The other thing that we do is we provide support to a wide variety of joint force commanders. Joint force commanders that are in this room today in terms of what we're able to do in places like Iraq, in places like Europe, in places like the Pacific. If it's non-kinetic support over a spectrum of offense, defense, information operations, this is what U.S. CyberCommand is generated to do. And then the last thing that we do is we do defense of the nation in cyberspace with a series of other actors within our government, working with the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Look no further than our ability to defend elections in 2018, 2020, being able to address the challenges of ransomware in 2021. This is the third output that the command is able to focus on. Now, how about the National Security Agency? As we take a look at NSA, our 2 missions, and after 70 years of doing this, I think missions that are well established. First of all, signals intelligence, operating outside the United States. How do we provide the deep insights of our adversaries to provide a national information advantage to our policymakers and commanders in competition, crisis, and conflict? And secondly, our cybersecurity mission. Preventing and eradicate cyber threats to U.S. national security systems and critical infrastructure, focused mainly on our defense industrial base. We do this in primarily 5 different locations: Maryland, Georgia, Texas, Hawaii, and Colorado. But we have a global presence with a series of partners. And if you take a look at the agency and the command and you were to say, what's the competitive advantage of these two organizations? I would offer the following. First of all, it begins, as I said, with our people. It is our talent that separates us, no doubt. Secondly, for U.S. Cyber Command, it's our capacity to be able to bring 133 teams, offense, defense, and 14 teams in the future to this growing domain is something that the command can do today. Third, no one in the world makes code or breaks code like the National Security Agency. We are the best at it, and we will remain the best at it. That is our parlance in terms of our DNA. Today we're going to talk about partnerships, and I would tell you that is the fourth element of strength of what our agency and command can do, a series of partnerships, whether or not they're international partnerships, interagency partnerships, industry partnerships, or today, academic partnerships. This is something that we see as critical for our lifeblood, for our success, for our future. And then finally, it's being able to get after technically tough and challenging missions. That's what our agency and command are known for. We go after the hardest of the hard, the most difficult networks, the secrets that our adversaries want to protect. That's what we do in and day out. So one of the things we'll talk about today that I think is so important is just the changing nature of the strategic environment upon which we live in. Now, I mentioned the fact that I came in a world that was really bipolar. Today's certainly a multipolar world as we look at it. And I would say the first element of the strategic environment that is so different is this growing, complex, and contested world in which we operate. We have expanding domains, as we all know. It used to be land, air, sea when I came in. Now it's certainly space and cyberspace. And if you think about space and cyberspace, no longer the purview of any one nation, any one government, but a multitude of actors, to including the commercial sector. But we're also seeing the increasing importance of space and cyberspace to elements of our national power. The other piece of this changing and complex and contested environment we live in today is this idea of asymmetric threats. As the senators talked about on their opening, the thought of hypersonics, the thought of ballistic missiles, the ability for nations to touch us where two oceans no longer provide us security is something different. It's also the informational and social media space that operates today. So think about how much differently we think about Homeland Defense in the Department of Defense as we go forward. And this last piece of this increasingly complex and contested world is the idea of trans-border threats. We certainly will talk about cyberspace today. We certainly know about climate change. But I would tell you very honestly, after 26 months, if someone would have told me in March of 2020 that we would still be looking at a global pandemic impacting our agency and command, that's something we didn't think about, but this is the world in which we live today. Here are the other elements of a strategic environment that I think that are important for us to think about. Perhaps none more as stark as the rise of China as a pacing challenge. I think of it both as a sprint and a marathon as I think about China. For the past 2 decades, as we have in this nation focused very, very hard on the threats that were facing our nation from counterterrorism and violent extremist organizations, China did not. And China had the capacity to grow and to be able to impact what they want to do in their own region. But the other thing that's also so very interesting are the numbers that come to us. In 1973, if you were to take a look at the GDP of China, 113 billion with a B dollars in 2020 dollars. 2020, China's GDP, 14.9 trillion with a T. The US in 2020, 20.7 trillion. There has been a tremendous growth in the military of China, as we all know, both in terms of its size, capability, presence, its desire to move from a regional to a global power. If you take a look economically at their discussions with regards to China 2025 and the top 10 industries that they're looking to impact, industries like automotive, pharmaceuticals, IT, industries that traditionally have been the purview of the United States are obviously the target of the Chinese. And perhaps the area that I would say is most challenging to us is the changing risk calculus we see with the Chinese. A risk calculus that's informed militarily by their operations in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, diplomatically with their wolf diplomacy efforts, economically with their Belt and Road Initiative, and informationally with their continued operations against those that will challenge their message. The last piece of this strategic environment that I would offer that I think we need to consider is the fact that my neighborhood, the neighborhood of cyberspace, has changed so dramatically. Cyberspace has created a new strategic environment in which cyber actors can increase their power, degrade the power of others, and gain strategic advantage. Our adversaries are targeting our economy, our critical infrastructure, and our electoral processes. They steal our defense secrets, intellectual property, and our personally identifiable information. They undertake persistent, malicious cyber campaigns to attempt to erode our military advantage. And they certainly leverage social media to carry out our influence operations. As I mentioned, 2021, I believe, was a pivotal year for our nation in cyberspace. Think about what we faced. We began the year with SolarWinds. We went to Microsoft Hafnium. We saw Colonial Pipeline. We saw JBS. We saw Kaseya. We saw supply chain operations. We saw ransomware. We saw zero-day vulnerabilities. All in the period of 1 year. But also think about the response that our nation has made to that. In terms of new authorities and new executive orders, 14028, that takes a look at being able to raise the bar of government systems. National Security Memorandum 8, that gives the National Security Manager increasing powers and ability to drive a higher standard for our national security systems. Also, the congressional actions with regards to breach notification. This is the element of strategic change that is happening today that is informing our strategic environment. So as I was thinking about the summit today, I was thinking, what are the trends and the thoughts for modern conflict? Well, I begin with this first thought, which is this idea of a continuity of action. We are no longer this idea of being at peace or at war. The idea that I came into the Army with, as you would be at peacetime and at some time a crisis would commence and you would get your equipment and go to war. That does not exist anymore. We enter into a continuum of competition, crisis, and conflict, I would offer. Situations develop rapidly. As the Chancellor had mentioned, the ability for us to look and temporally look at the progress of what has happened in a place like Russia and Ukraine is interesting. We went from competition to crisis in months, and crisis to conflict in weeks. For us, as we take a look at it from the perspective of U.S. CyberCommand and the National Security Agency, we look at the area of being able to contribute in a continuum of action as being one that rests on two different ideas. First of all, this idea that came out in the 2018 Department of Defense strategy, defend forward. How do we as a force operating outside the United States be able to be an active as opposed to a passive approach to our adversaries? Being able to identify malicious behavior, being able to share information with our partners, being able to take action when necessary. The other piece that I would tell you is this idea of persistent engagement at U.S. CyberCommand. What is persistent engagement? The idea that we're both going to enable and act. Enable our partners with information, sharing of tradecraft, and act when authorized. Defensively, offensively, informationally. How do we act to make sure that we're able to impact our adversaries? Let me give you an example. In 2021, we conducted 9 hunt-forward operations utilizing U.S. CyberCommand teams going to a series of different countries. These were countries that had asked for our assistance, deploying our defensive teams forward, being able to identify malware and tradecraft our adversaries were using, and then sharing that broadly with a commercial provider. What does that do? It provides, first of all, a security for our nation in cyberspace. It provides an inoculation of these threats. And it provides a partnership with a nation that has asked us for assistance. If continuity of action is the first trend that I see as we think about modern conflict, the second one is the need for agility. Agility. The world in which we live today requires our nation to address a multitude of threats. We'll remain a world and global power as long as we continue to operate with an ability to bring our elements of national power to an adversary at the time and place of our choosing. Today's environment is completely different from the environment that I saw in the post-9/11 world. Just think about the actors that we deal with today: nation-state actors, violent extremist organizations, proxies, hacktivists, criminals. So how do we achieve this agility that I talk about? Well, it begins, first of all, with partnerships. Our partnership at the National Security Agency and U.S. CyberCommand, foundational for us. But let me talk about a partnership that doesn't get a lot of notice, but I think that one that has tremendous potential for our nation: the State Partnership Program. And let me begin with the story. In 2018, we sent our first Hunt Forward team to the Ukraine. This was based on an idea of young people at U.S. CyberCommand and the National Security Agency saying, hey, we should send a team forward. We need to send a team forward to understand what our adversaries are doing, being able to capture that, and then being able to share it. Well, the information that was passed back to me in the fall of 2018 went something like this. Hey, General, we got into Kyiv, we got off the plane, and our team was ready to go. Really interesting, we were met by this lieutenant colonel. This lieutenant colonel of the California Army National Guard. The California Army National Guard. Yes, they told us we had a state partnership program between California and the Ukraine. They've been here since 1993. They knew every single person in the government, and any help that you needed with your Hunt Forward team, they said they would offer. These are the partnerships, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to be able to leverage today. In the Department of Defense, as we take a look at agility, our new National Defense Strategy talks about 3 different efforts that we will continue to work at as we look at being able to impact our adversaries. First of all, an idea of campaigning. How do we campaign in a multitude of different domains with a multitude of different capabilities at a time and place of our choosing? Secondly, this idea of integrated deterrence. How do we use multi-agency, multi-partner, multi-domain, and multi-instruments to bring a series of different capabilities that our adversary can't handle? We've seen much of this over the past several months as our nation has obviously been poised and ready to ensure we support the Russia-Ukraine situation. And then finally, the area of how do we build an enduring advantage with technology. We'll talk a little bit about this later today in terms of our ability to bring technology that truly is game-changing for our nation and for our department. The last piece that I would like to talk about in terms of this idea of trends and thoughts for modern conflict is the power of information. Think how much this has changed, even in the past several months. What have we seen with the Russia-Ukraine crisis? Information that's used to build and sustain a coalition. Information that's used to expose malign behavior. Information that's shared to increase a partner's knowledge of an adversary. Now, we're no strangers to this idea of information. In fact, we've seen the other side of the power of information in 2016, the power of influence operations in our elections. We saw fake personas on social media platforms play to a series of divisive issues to sow discord and influence the American public. But this idea of information is no longer caught up just in radio broadcasts or leaflets, and I would say it's obviously gone much further. It's in cyberspace via platforms that we all understand, used every day, and always used in a spirit of competition. But we've also seen with this idea of information sharing, the rise of different actors. Think of the rise of non-state actors like Anonymous that are having an impact today in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, or the response by the Conti ransomware actors as they take a look at operations they may do in support of Russia. What have we learned in terms of winning an information campaign? I'd offer the following. Information sharing, at its essence, must be 3 things. It must be accurate, it must be timely, it must be actionable. Exposing adversary activity inoculates all of us, I believe, against malign influence, against disinformation. Where have we seen this previously? In 2018, as we stood up the Russia Small Group at U.S. CyberCommand and the National Security Agency, working with a series of partners, we saw the impact that we could have on an internet research agency as we released select information. And then in 2020, the information that we released with regards to threats that the Iranians had posed to our election, I think, had a dousing effect on their activities. But as we all know, there is no substitute for getting a superior message by a superior messenger into the public domain. Consider President Zelensky. So as I think about this, and I'm at Vanderbilt University today, I think the question becomes is, what do we need from academia? Let me offer what I think we need from academia. First, we need a generation of experts in critical fields for our national security missions. We need cybersecurity experts, science, technology, engineering, mathematics personnel, policy experts, linguists that speak primarily 5 languages: Chinese, Russian, Arabic, Persian, Farsi, and Korean, and a series of analysts. Our hiring needs are large, Chancellor, and we'll look forward to working very closely with Vanderbilt University at both the command and the agency. The second piece that I would say is we require ideas, insights, and initiatives. Ideas, insights, and initiatives that impact the areas, the operations that we must do. Let me give 4 different examples. At Dreamport, an unclassified facility that rests right outside of Columbia, Maryland, we are working with academia and industry, our command and agency, to develop the next zero trust architectures. This is an idea of partnership where ideas, insights, and initiatives matter. Secondly, the idea and the importance of deterrence in cyberspace. The continued discussion that's ongoing today in places like Vanderbilt University are very, very helpful as we think about our actions, authorities, and operations of the future. Third, influence operations in the United States. One of the things that I've learned over the past 2 election cycles is the power of academia to bring insights, information, to influence operations that are being conducted in the United States. That information, those insights, provide us the capabilities to look outside the United States for these actors. And then I would offer there is the historical example of where we have gone back to academia to look for assistance as we prosecute a target. JTF Ares, which was stood up in the fall of 2015, looking at ISIS and ISIL, went to a series of academic partners to better understand messaging, to better understand how we might have an impact. This was a valuable relationship that taught us much as we thought about the adversary of that time. And then I would tell you, between our agency, our command, and academia, we have a responsibility to build a greater supply of cybersecurity experts. We're doing that today with Vanderbilt University and the National Security Agency as we take a look at robotics camps with common curriculum done between the National Security Agency, Vanderbilt, and cyber.org. But we're also very interested as we look to the future with our Gen Cyber initiatives, the ability to look at the K through 12 population, to be able to influence an ability for others, particularly our younger generations, to understand the benefits, the initiatives, and the opportunities that present themselves in cyberspace. This is something that we do collectively. This is something that we do through U.S. CyberCommand and our academic engagement network of 94 different universities in 40 states. And it's also something that the National Security Agency does with our centers of academic excellence, 370 in total, operating throughout the United States. So as I close today, I thought much about the idea of modern conflict. And one of the things that I wanted to leave you with is, as we think about modern conflict, I would offer to all of you that there is a changing character of conflict that we're seeing today. And let me describe that just a bit. So the first element of this changing character of conflict is the idea of the importance of intelligence and information. The collection of intelligence is changing. In the environment that we operate today, we no longer can rely on forward operating bases, the ability to provide ground sensors, or the ability to use airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance in the environments in which we operate. We will rely on cyber operations and space for most of our intelligence collection and critical key insights of our adversaries. As I mentioned, the sharing of intelligence and information is providing its own capacity, capability, and outcome. It must be accurate, it must be timely, it must be actionable. But to be effective, it must build coalitions. It must expose adversary actions, and it must enable a partner's defense. But not every crisis and conflict is alike. This will be a risk decision that we will enter into and balance the outcomes with the sources and methods that are there. The second piece of the changing characteristics of modern conflict I would offer is the need for speed and agility with the foundation of unity of effort. Big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning will push the boundaries of time and understanding for all of us. My experiences in 2020 with a deepfake-like video that the Iranians had utilized in the 2020 elections drove a rapid, and I believe right response as we went through the decision to expose this. We'll be faced with many more of these as we go to the future. I believe our future conflict will drive us to assess our intelligence, our cyber insights, rapidly to drive what we believe will need to be effective responses. The third element I would share with you is defending our data and our weapon systems. The Department of Defense has continued to drive data security and weapons system security as a foundation to what we must do. NSA is the baseline for what we do this because we provide, as you well know, the algorithms that empower our best encryption. Encryption, as we say at the agency, is our last line of defense. In an environment of near-peer adversaries, we must communicate and operate with assurance of the integrity of the data that we operate with. This is something that we have learned. This is something that we are correcting. This is something that we are moving forward with. The last piece that I would share with you is the importance of partnerships. This is the changing character of conflict of the future. I talked about the partnerships of our agency and command, but I would tell you that our partnerships for success ride on interagency, industry, international, and academic partnerships. Remember, the United States has partners. Our adversaries have clients. In this complex and contested world, where we need to have a degree of agility, where information is power, partnerships truly do provide us the element that ensures success in our operations today, in the near term, and into the future. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today, your patience, and I wish everyone a great summit. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, General. I think we have time for a couple of questions. Okay, yeah, thank you. All right. So
Sorry,
I understand that today is the 4-year, marks 4 years, is today.
Today.
In the job, yeah. So what surprised you most in your role as director of the NSA and commander of CyberCommand?
I think, first of all, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, was just the changing nature of the environment in which we operate today. Mm-hmm. I would say in 2018, we were very, very focused on influence operations as we were getting ready for the midterm elections. But that's just one of many different venues that we've seen over the past 4 years. I think the second piece is just the importance of partnerships. I mean, this truly is. So we're here at Vanderbilt University today. Mm-hmm. The partnership with academia, we weren't thinking about, I think, in the same way of the outcomes that we would be able to achieve collectively. I mentioned the idea of our importance of working together to build a population of cybersecurity experts of the future. You can't do that alone. I can't do it alone. I think that this is a partnership piece. And I think the last piece that I would say that is so change for us is just as we continue to move forward this idea of information. And we've seen this over the past several months as we move forward with the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I think that truly as we move into new venues with regards to crisis and conflict operations, information will be the centerpiece of success for us.
Yeah, great, thank you. Another question regarding Russia and the Ukraine. I think a question that a lot of us are wondering and asking are, why haven't the Russians done more with their cyber power? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the things that we believe both at the agency and the command is we are fully vigilant in terms of what's going on today. We don't necessarily believe that by any means this is done. And so we have obviously a complete vigilant approach to what's going on in the defense of our nation and our allies. Other things I would say is that I think over the past couple of weeks, we have a much better feel for what's happened in the Ukraine. This idea that nothing has happened is not right, that there have been destructive attacks, a series of destructive attacks, that the satellite communications have been targeted, that the Ukrainians have done a tremendous job in terms of being able to have a resiliency. We're proud of that at both the agency and the command. We had sent a Hunt Forward team in December of 2021 there to work with our partners. But at the end of the day, I think that this really is, a decision process that we will look back on in terms of what the Russians had decided to do, and we'll know more with passing years.
As information comes out, yeah, thank you. 2020 midterm elections. Will there be another Russia small group? I know you mentioned it. Do you want to explain a little bit of what that is and thinking about whether there will be another one?
So when I arrived at the National Security Agency, U.S. CyberCommand in 2018, we were fully focused on midterm elections that were going to take place in 2018. And one of the things that they had done early on was bring together the agency and the command to say, okay, what are we going to do? And we thought that the best way of being able to go forward was take the best folks from NSA and CyberCommand, come together, form a team. We call it the Russia Small Group. It wasn't that small, I would just offer. But it had the focus of really doing three things. First of all, how do you know the adversary better than the adversary knows itself? Secondly, how do you work with both the Department of Homeland Security and FBI to share information? Remember, we do this as a partnership with other elements of our government. And third thing, we were very, very upfront. We told adversaries, and we said, hey, if you decide to attempt to influence or interfere in our elections, we will take actions after you. And we did those things as well. So to your point, what are we doing for 2022? The band is already back together. It's formed. We no longer call it the Russia Small Group. We call it the Election Security Group. We have broader issues than just one nation. They are working with a series of partners. And I think that the interesting thing is really how do you broaden the team as you take a look at election security? So I talked a little bit about this idea of bringing academic partners into what we're doing. It's also how do you bring the right industry partners? How does the National Guard come into this? That's among the things that we're doing. We're less than 200 days before our nation goes to vote for our midterm elections, and I assure you that we are ready and we will be ready going forward.
That's great to hear. And on that note, I don't know, it occurred to me as I was listening, what keeps you up at night?
Talent.
Oh,
talent. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt. We were talking about it last night at dinner. We were talking about it at breakfast this morning. As I think about things, it's how do you recruit, how do you train, and most importantly, how do you retain an expert workforce that works at our agency and the command, and I think more broadly now for our nation. How do we develop that pool of talent that we need? And so very, very pleased that Vanderbilt University here in its inaugural summit is doing much of that to bring that discussion to the forefront. So the sleep that I do get is often punctuated with a really great concern about being able to keep our best talent.
All right.
So
well, thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
All right, appreciate it.
All right, great. Thank you.